excited about this topic because the trend of house prices is just going up and rental prices are also going up. And I think, and the cost of living obviously is following in suit. I think that tiny houses really gives people a reprieve from that and another option. Welcome to the Dream Home Renovation Podcast, where we talk about everything to do with your home renovation and creating the home of your dreams, including interior design, renovation, and styling. I'm your host, Claire, and today we'll be sharing some real-life renovations. I'm so excited today to be speaking to Samantha Pratt. Samantha is an interior designer, stylist, and serial renovator who for the last 4 years has been building tiny houses. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Hi,
Can I call you Sam?
Of course you can.
So I came across you on Instagram and I love the fact that you have been building tiny houses. I don't think it's something that when we were living in the US was quite popular, but it's something I haven't really seen a whole lot of here in Australia. So I'm really excited to learn a little bit more. But before we get into it, can you start by telling us a little bit about your background?
So I studied interior design back in Melbourne in 1999. I have a degree in interior design and construction. And for many years, I actually didn't practice my profession. I did a whole heap of other things. I have been a flight attendant for 8 years. I was a retail manager at Bunnings. And then after a workplace accident, I actually went into visual merchandising and then started doing more interior design as a profession and property styling. And that's what led me to where I am today.
That's a really interesting background. And I imagine all of those jobs have played a huge role in pulling all the pieces together for the role that you're currently doing today. I mean,
prior to studying interior design, I did a degree in criminology. I could probably also build you a prison as well as build you a tiny home.
Oh, that is a very interesting skill to have. So anyone out there who's listening and is interested in having an escape room or what do they call it? A panic room in your home. Yep, you're the lady to call.
Absolutely. But I'll style it really beautifully for you. It won't be like any other panic room you've come across.
That'll make all the difference. Okay, so let's talk about tiny houses. So like I said, I'm excited about this topic because the trend of house prices is just going up and rental prices are also going up and up. And I think the cost of living obviously is following in suit. So I think that tiny houses really gives people a reprieve from that and another option for those maybe who don't think that they can afford to enter the property market in its current state. And so I think it's a really relevant topic and something that I'm really excited to sort of explore. So I'd love to know how you got started with tiny houses.
So I suppose like everybody else, we got married, we had a baby, we were working 9 to 5. We built this enormous house, this architecturally 4 bedrooms, swimming pool, kids play gym out the back. And we thought we were living the dream. Everybody teaches you, you get married, you have kids, you build your house, you work for the next 35 or 40 years to pay it off. And that's the dream. Well, we realized very early on that wasn't what we wanted to do. And after having that beautiful home for 4 years, we realized we were actually a slave to that house.
Right.
Not only a slave to the mortgage, but then you have to work more to pay it off. You're a slave to cleaning. And we have one child. We had a 4-bedroom house. We didn't even utilize it. We started to downsize. We actually sold that property because we had built it from scratch. And it was in a market that was rising. It was in a great area. So we took that money that we made from that property and we bought our first apartment. And we thought, can we live with a child in an apartment? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. So we bought, ironically, a 3-bedroom apartment once again for a 1-child family. And then we started to downgrade from there. And we downgraded to the point that we got down to, once our child had left home, a 1-bedroom apartment just for Herb and I. And then of course, COVID hit, and like many other people, we were looking for a project to do. And so we jumped on the vintage caravan bandwagon, so to speak, and we bought our first vintage caravan. And I had never, ever been in a caravan in my life. I had never stayed the night in a caravan. I had never known anybody that had a caravan. And so we thought we will build this thing, and if we don't like it, we'll flip it. And we built it. And the first night we spent away in it, I absolutely hated it. And I thought, we'll do these 5 days in this caravan park and then we will sell it. Well, I don't know what clicked. Something clicked in that week. And I thought, we could really do this. And rather than build just caravans to go caravanning, which a lot of people obviously do, we wanted it to be that tiny home experience. I thought, why not take the skill that I have and why can't I make this more like a tiny home rather than a traditional caravan? So while our tiny homes move, I suppose we see ourselves as a hybrid between a caravan and a tiny home.
Okay. And so you're designing them not necessarily just for holidays, though. You're designing them for living, permanent
Correct.
living.
Yes. So we live currently in our little caravan full time. That is our full-time home. Like people
So the
think,
one that you hated on that first night, is that still the caravan that you're in?
oh goodness, no. We have done, this is our 6th build now.
Okay.
So we're to the 6th one. So that first one was sold. Then I went on and I flipped a couple with a girlfriend because my husband was so over it after the first one. And then we had a bus. So last year we converted a Toyota Coaster bus and we did an entire lap of Australia. Then we're also building one for Mac in Melbourne, which is our child. So that is build number 6 for us. That's not quite finished yet, but Mac will go traveling in that tiny home around Australia next year. And I suppose the one we're living in now is, build number 5, which will absolutely, like, these are the last 2 builds. We're not building anymore. We are content with these 2 builds that we have now.
Okay. And do you think, so you mentioned that you're traveling around with them. Do you think you'll set up roots somewhere? Do you have somewhere to come back to with your tiny house, or what are you planning to do?
No, not at the moment. We do love the fact that not only is this tiny living, but the fact that our backyard, front yard, our playground can be different every single day. We love the fact that we're not stuck in one location. We actually like the fact that our tiny home comes with us wherever we go. You know, we've stayed at $1 million waterfront views. We've woken up at beaches. We've woken up in rainforests. We're at the point now that the more that we travel, the more we actually love this lifestyle and can't see ourselves settling down in one spot anyplace soon.
I think the way that, working from home since COVID, especially, I know I actually worked from home years before COVID and I was like, I don't think I could ever work in an office again. And then COVID hit and the world changed and all of a sudden working from home wasn't as unusual as it used to be. And I think it really sets the stage for this type of living to experience the world. I know when I went off traveling, I'd have to, basically quit my job and leave and go off traveling and do what I needed to do. And then, use the money that I had and then come back and maybe pick up the odd job, but you weren't able to have the flexibility that you could today. So I can absolutely see this as something that, is really inspiring for a lot of people.
Yeah, the funny thing is also that we have met a lot of people on Instagram that are doing exactly what we're doing. And we meet a lot of people in real life. And everybody thinks, oh, well, to go off traveling, I need skills in the IT industry. I need internet skills. Not everyone wants to be a content creator or a travel blogger. And everyone thinks that that's what people are doing out there. But we have met people from their 20s up to people in their 80s. And all of these different people, not all of them have retired early like we have. So a lot of them are still working. And people are doing jobs like, you think about it, when we're out there camping and doing other things or living our lives, we need things like hairdressers and electricians still, and you still want other beauty services and things break down. So we have met people that are still working their trades, living this tiny lifestyle. It's not just that you need to do something online to live this lifestyle. There's plenty of people out there doing this and doing conventional jobs, but just doing them on the move or where they've settled up in their tiny homes.
Wow. It opens up a whole new world. And so for someone wanting to renovate or build a tiny home, so what would be some of the challenges that you've faced?
I suppose the biggest challenge is that if you're building a tiny home that is movable, that's different to a tiny home that you're going to put onto a block of land.
Right.
And we have friends that have done that. And obviously, in some respects, that is easier because you don't need to worry about the mechanics of the the actual vehicle that's moving, be it a bus or a caravan. So yeah, building it on a property so that it doesn't move has then its own different restrictions because there's things with council and permits and things like that. But building a tiny home that moves, we naively went into it thinking, gosh, we've renovated 13 houses through our lives. How hard can it be to take a small shell and convert that into a house that moves? Let me tell you, it is entirely different. The products you use are different. The fact that that vessel that you're traveling in moves, you have to think about things like how you secure it. You need to worry about not only the weight of the materials you're putting into that tiny home, but the weight distribution when that's on the road. You have to worry about the fact if you get a leak in your tiny home, you certainly can't use things like plasterboard. You can't use things, people do, but we don't think you can use things like real tiles because as you move, the grout moves, the silicon moves. It's a whole new ball game. So I'd say the way that you build a tiny home and the materials you use in a tiny home are probably they were the biggest challenges and the biggest learning curves for us. And the fact that we have built our tiny homes in things like a bus and vintage caravans, nothing's straight. Yeah. You have curved walls, you have curved ceilings, you have things protruding out such as wheel hubs and electrical boxes that you need to be there that you don't have in a traditional home. So it's the whole build process and the way you tackle that is completely different.
I imagine, power, water, all of those, things you have to take into consideration. You can't just obviously wire it up to plug something in. You have to have, I guess, portable systems, or how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So the first few builds that we did were reliant on being in, say, a caravan park or on somebody's property with regular power where you would plug into the side of the van to have 240-volt power in there. Then we decided, well, hey, we want to be totally off-grid. We want to be able to go into the middle of a paddock or out into the bush or camp on the beach. And that requires a whole different system. So we have portable batteries that are set up to solar panels, that are set up to things called inverters that convert that solar energy through your batteries, which will then allow you to plug in your toaster or your hair straightener or your coffee machine so that you have power from the sun. Then obviously you have to think about things like water. So we have to carry all of our own water with us. So we have water tanks. And then, of course, you have to worry about how you dispose of that water once you've washed your dishes. So then we have a grey water tank because you don't just want your water going out onto the ground necessarily. And a lot of places where you go to free camp will require the fact that you need to be able to contain your wastewater. And then you have to think about, well, we need to go to the bathroom. We need a toilet. So we have a toilet in our caravan, like this little hidden toilet underneath our bed that comes out on rollers underneath a little trap door. So there's all of these things that you need to think about that are, as I said, different to building a conventional house.
Well, you touched on a lot of items there, like household items that you would expect to have in a house that you think would be a luxury item in small living, like, hair straighteners and lots of accessories. For me, I feel like storage would probably be one of the biggest challenges, because if I was to go tiny living, I would need, especially with kids, because a lot of people will do that now, I would need to have really functional storage so that you can service, the family, cook, clean, all of the items that you just mentioned. So how do you even go about coming up with storage solutions for tiny living?
So storage is something I'm really passionate about. And this is something that people ask us a lot. And I suppose I've had so much practice that every time we moved, we downsized. So Every time we sold a property, I was really lucky. All of those properties were sold fully furnished. I wasn't taking hordes of furniture and hordes of personal belongings with me every time we moved. And I think actually being a flight attendant for 8 years taught me how to pack a bag and travel really lightly. So in terms of storage, that forms the fundamental basis, I suppose, of any build that we do. And we try and utilize every single centimetre of space that we have. So every single bit of a build, no space is wasted. If there is a gap that's 5 centimetres by 5 centimetres, you think, what can I put in that gap so that that space is not wasted? And you would be surprised, our tiny home at the moment is only 14 feet.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of space that we have to stand in that caravan is 70 centimetres wide by 140 centimetres long. Now, most people's toilets are bigger than that, but every bit of space is utilised. The whole underbed system is full of our water tanks, our whole pull-out kitchen. We've got our toilet under there, and we've got a whole garage, well, what we call a garage under there, for bits and pieces that you would normally have in a conventional garage.
So this is under the floor you're talking, is it?
It's actually under our bed because our bed is raised up. So all of that space underneath our bed was built and utilised as an entire storage system. It's literally like a big Tetris system under there.
And how, like, because you've also added a doggy area as well. So how do you even make all that fit and get access to it?
So that doggy area is actually in Mac's van. So if you our Instagram page, there's actually been 2 builds going on at the same time or in tandem to each other. But yeah, look, the doggy door, I'm obsessed with that. Mac has a dog and her name is Honey and she's a rescue dog. The entire back of Mac's van was designed around Honey.
Oh, I love it.
So her cage will actually go behind that art, and one side of underneath Mac's bed has got all of the electrical and water tanks, and once again the other side is all set up for storage. But what I was going to mention in relation to storage is the key to storage in any tiny home is not to have too much stuff, but baskets. And I'm talking, you can have wicker baskets, wire baskets, boxes, whatever you want to call them. But we have found boxes inside of cupboards are your best friend for storage because when you open the cupboard doors, nothing's going to fall out.
Of course, you can't just leave it loose in the cupboard, can you? Because it's going to move around.
Correct. So in our bus build, we actually had a wardrobe in there, and after about 6 months of being in that bus, we converted that wardrobe and we put in shelves instead. We actually tripled the space in that wardrobe by folding our clothes. And it's just thinking about all of those types of things, things like crockery, which we use a melamine product for that, but everything is stackable inside each other. So once again, you're not wasting space there. You put things inside your saucepans so that you're not wasting space there. When we're moving, we use the inside of our microwave to carry things like our eggs so that our eggs don't break. And it's just a whole different mindset. And that hasn't come about quickly. That has come about, as I said, from years of downsizing and now living on the road, living this lifestyle for 4 years. We're still learning. We still come up with clever tricks and we think, oh, wow, we hadn't thought of that before.
And I can imagine it's like a house. I mean, you've got to live in it, move in it to sort of see how the flow and the function work. And I imagine it does take a little bit of time to get used to. Is there anything from your, I guess, big house living that you miss?
In all honesty, no, there really isn't. And I suppose if there was, we wouldn't be so committed to this lifestyle.
Right.
People say, well, when are you going home? And we say, but we are home. Like, this is home now. And if you had have asked me this 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, there is no way. I have loved the traditional houses that we have lived in, and design has always played such a big part of my life. And to think that I didn't have a home to live in and to style. And people said to me when I started on this journey, they said, but what are you going to do? You're going to get bored. You can't keep styling these tiny homes. You can't keep moving things around like you do in a traditional house. But I have found a way that I can still do that. And I can still live out this passion. And that's why there is no end date and why I think we are home. This is the most comfortable I think we've ever felt in a home because it's with us the whole time.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And so going back to your comment about styling, because obviously when you style, you'll seasonally style, you bring in a Christmas tree. I imagine your entire approach to styling has changed because you don't want excess stuff around. So how have you taken your space and created something that's really unique to you guys? What sort of style approach have you taken? What are the differences?
So I suppose the approach that I take is that everything has to have a dual purpose. So, for example, I use linen that is double-sided. If I buy a doona cover, I make sure that it's double-sided because then I can have two different looks. Anybody that knows me, that follows me on Instagram, will know that I love to mash up my linen. I don't do matchy-matchy sets. And so that's another way that I can get unique looks by mixing things up in a non-traditional sense. You did touch on a Christmas tree before. So no, we won't have a Christmas tree this year. We don't decorate for Halloween. I do live vicariously through all of my favorite accounts for that. But I will do something like bring in a small element, like I have a little round wreath that I carry with me. And so that will come out at Christmas time. And, you know, I will use things that maybe will forage around the place to create a Christmas element. People might send me things. I do collaborations. I do some content creation still. People will send products through that, and I will live vicariously through, as I said, other accounts to get my fix of those types of styling. But I think the main difference is just thinking about really consciously things that we bring into our home, that it does have to have a dual purpose. And I won't bring something in purely for its decorative appeal like I would have in a traditional house.
Right.
You know, if you finish with it, you can put it in the cupboard, you can pop it in the spare room. That luxury. Everything that we bring into our space has to be functional, but not only does it have to be functional, it has to be aesthetically pleasing. I will not have anything ugly, even down to the water bucket I have needs to be aesthetically pleasing and match with our interiors.
And it makes complete sense. I mean, if everything has to be completely functional, there's no point surrounding yourself with things that you don't enjoy. You may as well make those functional items as pretty as you say as possible. And so talk to me about the walls in the caravan. So the caravan that you live in, do you have pictures up? Do you have artwork up? I imagine it would be small. I imagine it would need to be screwed to the wall. But do you bring in those sorts of personal elements as well?
Absolutely. And I suppose that's where I think that our approach is a little bit more unique than a traditional caravanning approach, which is why I consider ourselves more of a tiny home. Because I have done things like I have wallpapered our walls. All of our walls are painted. Yes, we have multiple pieces of art on the wall. No piece of art is bigger than an A4 size because I physically don't have the space for it because we have lots of windows. And yes, everything is on a wire, which has then had a screw or a nail put into the wall. And then I will put a little Velcro tab at the bottom to ensure that even if the caravan bounces around during travel, that piece of artwork won't come off the wall. And I've done things like I have a little gallery wall in our dinette area that I will change up, and I have frames in the van where I can easily change the artwork out to give us a different look. And artwork is like storing a piece of paper. It doesn't take up space. So that's a really quick and easy thing for me to do and to change up. Honestly, we have all of the elements in our tiny home that people would have in a normal home. It's just viewed differently.
Like, do you have to have any kind of planning or any sort of assessments or certifications when you're renovating a tiny home? I imagine it needs obviously to be roadworthy if you're moving it, but from a building perspective, is there anything that's required?
There are requirements and they are different for every state. I suppose probably the most stringent building requirements were when we were converting our bus, so our Toyota Coaster last year, and that needed to be certified by an engineer because we had actually downgraded it from a light commercial vehicle to be able to drive it on a regular driver's license. And that's all about weight ratings and the way that the bus moved. But there are also certain things that we needed to include in that so that the amount of seats that you had couldn't exceed the amount of people that were sleeping in the beds. You had to have certain amount of cupboard space in literage per person sleeping in that van. The biggest thing with any tiny home would be your 240 electrical. Our tiny home has both 240 and 12 volt. Now 12 volt you can very easily do on your own. We watch lots of YouTube videos. We have learnt so much about our 12-volt system. But with your 240-volt system, it has to be done by a qualified electrician.
Right.
And you do need you do need to have your safety switch installed, which you'd have in a normal home. And you do need an electrical safety certificate to say that it's been done by an electrician, obviously for your own safety, for resale, and also for your insurance, because your insurance company needs to know that, it's been done properly. If they're going to insure these tiny homes, they want to make sure that the build's done to a certain code. Apart from electrical, it's really hard to answer specific questions because, as I said, state by state, it's all very different. There's also gas. If people have gas on board, that has to be done by a licensed gas fitter, and also has to have its own special certificate for compliance.
Right. So I guess the key there is if you are looking to take the venture and renovate a tiny home, it's important to look at the normal regulations locally, because I guess a lot of people probably would think, oh, it's just, it's an old caravan, we can just do what we like with it. Or I imagine converting a bus is like a major exercise, like you just mentioned, because, it's gone from a completely different use into a bus. But yeah, I mean, that's really interesting to know. And so what would you say would be like the average cost? I imagine it varies completely, especially depending on what you're putting into the home and the age of it too. Because I imagine the more vintage it is and the more character it has, the more expensive they may be.
Yes and no. A budget can vary wildly. So as I said, with our first build, we didn't have an off-grid electrical system, and it was probably more aesthetic. So if people want to build a tiny home to be on a property and they have access to power and water, that's going to be a whole heap cheaper than it is building a tiny home that you're going to move. So the tiny home that we have now, so our van now, our electrical setup alone was close to $10,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So to put all of those components in, to live properly off grid, to have your, electrician come in and do your 240-volt for you and wire that up. Yeah, that's not a cheap component in itself. And look, you can really spend as much or as little as you like. One of the flips that we did on one of the vans that I did with a girlfriend, the cost of the aesthetic flip on that van was only $3,000. And the van wasn't in amazing condition, but you can do it on a really, really tight budget if you need to. I think a lot of people say, there's two schools of thought. There's people that go totally overboard and I think will overcapitalize. And then there's people that, will do it really tight and not spend the money where it needs to be. So you could spend anything from, a couple of thousand, maybe even, a couple of hundred if people are buying a van that's in quite good condition, to tens of thousands of dollars converting something like a bus, for example, to turn it into a tiny home. So it can vary wildly, but we have a motto that we like to do it once and we like to do it right. So we invest in quality products, and we've built this van for our lifestyle. As I said, not everybody needs it to be totally off grid, and not everybody needs to carry all their own water and power and solar and all of that. But though that build that we have now is quite an expensive build, because of the fact that it is totally off-grid.
But still a really amazing, affordable living situation compared to buying a house. So, I mean, if you're looking to buy a unit these days, I mean, I live in Brisbane, minimum you're looking to spend is at least $500,000-$600,000, so take that deposit and you could put that in and create something that really quite beautiful that you can take off grid and you can live remotely, or you can, look to invest in some land somewhere and pop it on it, and it's a completely different way of living, but it's, affordable.
Yeah. So this van that we're in at the moment, all up, all in, cost of van, everything that we've done, everything that's included, down to, the linen and the utensils that we use, we're all in for $25,000.
Yeah. Now, which is incredible. And that's that services your life, for travel and for all of those, the experiences that you get to experience. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah. So for $25,000, you can have something that is totally sustainable. Sure, it's small. I will not lie to you. Sometimes living with my husband 1 centimeter away from me at all times is challenging. And, for many, many years, he worked night shift, I worked day shift, and we said, we've been married nearly 27 years. And I think if we had have had a conventional working job relationship, I don't know whether we'd be where we're at now. So that's a true testament to how much I love him, that I can live in such a tiny space with him. But for $25,000, why would you not do this?
Yeah, it is really incredible. And to be honest, something my husband and I would have done before we had our 3 kids. I mean, we traveled the world together, backpacked and all the rest of it, happy out, living off grid, doing whatever. But the moment with the 3 kids and the 3 dogs, we're relatively housebound, but it excites us. I mean, we've been talking about renovating a bus for the last 10 years, something we ended up renovating a lot of houses, but something that we know that eventually we will do. I think it's an itch that we'd love to scratch, and talking to you just kind of inspires me even more. I'm sort of like, oh, if somebody were to want to look for a tiny house with some character, where do you even start shopping?
So we have bought all of our tiny homes from Facebook Marketplace. This particular one we're in now, really quick funny story. I had been searching for this shaped van for over 12 months. And I found it when we were in WA and we still had 6 months of our lap to do, and it was in country Victoria. I rang the guy on the phone. I said, I'm not interested in reducing the price, but I have a huge request to ask. Can I pay for it now, sight unseen, and can you hold it for me for 6 months? So all of our finds have been on Facebook Marketplace. But during COVID and coming out of COVID, the prices were absolutely crazy.
Right.
I was seeing vans on there and they were being snapped up within hours. And in fact, we have sold bar 2 of our vans through Facebook Marketplace. The other 2 have been sold through people I've met on Instagram. But the vans that we sold were advertised and purchased within 2 to 4 hours.
Wow.
That is how quickly these things have sold. But there's other places. There's Gumtree, there's word of mouth, there's, people selling them on farms, and they've got messages on the side of the road. People will park them on the side of the road. There's all sorts of places that you can find them. And then there's really quirky things as well that you can use for tiny homes that are fixed, like old railway carriages and things like that. I suppose you're only limited by your imagination.
And so what advice would you give somebody who's considering buying and renovating, building a tiny home?
I would say do your research. That is my biggest thing. I think a lot of people go into this really gung-ho, and like we naively did at the very beginning, thinking A, it would be easy, B, it would be cheaper than it is, and C, it would be easier than it is. None of those things are true. It'll be harder than you realize. It will cost more than you think. And once you've finished it, you will think, why didn't I think of that before I did the build? Probably budget 50% more in time and expenses than you think. Look at other people's builds. And I mean, not just look at Pinterest, don't look at Instagram. Physically look at what people have done if you get the opportunity. I've even encouraged people to go and hire a caravan, go and stay in a tiny home for the weekend, hire a camper van. If you want to fit out a camper van, go and hire one for 3 or 4 days, because I'm telling you, once you've lived in them, once you've traveled in them, your mindset changes, and what you think you need at the beginning is, after you've lived in them, is not actually what you need. And our first build compared to this build now, 4 years apart, are wildly different. Still aesthetically pleasing,
yes,
but wildly different in the approach that we took to the actual build and what was put into that build.
Yeah, and like function is going to be at the forefront. I mean, more than any, like you always talk about the flow of a house. You're not necessarily going to change the flow of a tiny home, because ultimately you've got a relatively small footprint, but the storage and how you work within that space. I mean, that to me is what is so interesting, is how you create all those little pockets of space to create something really, really functional. And I love seeing that. I mean, I've been watching your journey since we met on Instagram.
Even our plumbing was designed in a way that it would fit behind these drawers to utilize the most amount of space possible. That's what I mean. This build is wildly different to the first build, where I didn't necessarily think in that much detail. I think the other thing is reach out to people who have done this before. When we were doing our bus build, for example, I reached out to a couple of accounts that I have followed, and they so generously gave up their time to ask me questions, like I have given up our time to ask to give so much advice to people that have asked us questions. So reach out to your favorite accounts. Don't just reach out with random questions. Try and form a bit of a relationship before you start bombarding them with 100 questions on how do I do this and how do I do that. But yes, stalk your favorite accounts. Look into other people that have done this, and just ask their advice. We're all so willing to share. We're all so passionate about this life that we live. And you said before you've got 3 children, you've got 3 dogs, you're a bit housebound. We've met so many traveling families on the road that, okay, I've never met anyone that has 3 dogs, but I've met a couple of families that have got 4 and 5 children. They're homeschooling these kids on the road. We certainly meet people that have got a couple of dogs. So it is all possible. Sure, they're not doing it in something as tiny as we have got, but a lot of them have sold up their homes, they've sold up their businesses, and they can see the benefit that it is to, their relationships and to their kids' development of traveling the road and living this lifestyle where, every day is different and there's so much just going on. People say, oh, but don't you get sick of the change? And I'm like, no, the change is what keeps us going. We're not the type of people, sure, in our van, we know exactly where the coffee cups are. We know where everything is. And I suppose that's the order in our lives. We know everything has a place. And inside of our little world, everything is very ordered. But everything outside is variable and things can change in an instant. And that excites us. That doesn't scare us. That really excites us. But that's something that you've got to embrace and something that you've got to want.
No, I think it's wonderful. And talking about that, how do you create, obviously you're not living inside of your van 24/7, so you'd have an outdoor space of sorts. How do you create, like when you park up and you're going to stay somewhere for a little while, how do you create a nice outdoor area?
Okay, so perfect example. You probably haven't had a chance to look at my Instagram stories this morning, but scary Instagram. We had a bit of a scary incident last night. I won't go into all of the details here, but have a look. You might get a laugh out of it. But we have moved today and set up camp. So the first thing we do is once our van is physically stable on the site, we're at this beautiful beached area at the moment. We put out our outdoor mat. We put out our outdoor chairs. We slide out our outdoor kitchen. Our awning goes up. We've got a side wall that goes onto our awning. Fairy lights go up. The outdoor shower gets set up. And honestly, that's it. Within half an hour, our home has literally quadrupled in size in this outdoor space we've got. And we've even got a fire pit where we are now. So we'll be setting up a fire tonight. Yeah, we have this fire pit and there is literally no one else around us. We're in this beautiful spot right by the beach and we can actually hear the beach waves crashing sitting just outside our caravan.
And I love your shower setup. So for those of you who are interested, you can head on over to Curiously Carter. I'll put all the details in the show notes so that you can click on the link. But I love how you added fairy lights to your shower area. It is such a small detail that I don't think a lot of people would think of. You think of putting lights outside as like an exterior, bit of ambiance, but to put it around the shower is created a really lovely feel. And I absolutely loved that post. I thought it was just so special. Do you create those little experiences to make it feel like home?
If I bring something in, it needs to be functional. I need it to be aesthetically pleasing. That's the designer in me. He came home one day with a red bucket. And it was a $1 red bucket and you have no idea how that triggered me. And he's like, but nobody will see it. And I'm like, but I see it in the garage and that triggers me because it's red. And I went out and bought a $37 bucket that was pink. but that makes me happy. And that is aesthetically pleasing to me. And some people might think that's crazy. But let me tell you, when you live in a tiny home and you don't have any space and you need to look at something all the time, that to me is really important. I want it to look like a regular home and I don't want it to look like a caravan. So as much as possible, I try and bring those elements in.
You mentioned that this is one of the last projects that you're doing. Do you think that rings true? Or are you a bit addicted?
Oh, I'm totally addicted. Like, if anybody that knows me will know that this has just become an absolute passion. And 6 builds in 4 years. We are getting older and it is physically becoming more challenging. And I have promised my husband that this will be the last one. I might have pinky promised him. And look, probably the only thing that could sway me would be if there was an Airstream that came up in Australia for a reasonable price, because we all know that those Airstreams in the US are incredibly. But I suppose that would be the only thing that would sway me, is that if one of those ever came up for sale in Australia, I probably wouldn't be able to say no. For the most, I have promised him that, this is the last one.
I know you're retired now. You still probably have your eye on interior design. Is there any trends that you're seeing that you're loving, or any trends that you're seeing coming up in 2025 that you're interested in?
Color drenching is a big trend at the moment. So painting the walls and the ceilings in all one color. I absolutely love that. And I'm not talking neutral, safe colors. I'm talking, beautiful olive greens, deep red wines, those types of, really rich terracotta colors. That really excites me. Anybody who knows me will know that I don't do white and beige interiors. I was a property stylist for many years and I did that accents of black because that appealed to a mass market. We could make that look very luxe. But with a tiny home, I think it's your opportunity to experiment with both color and textiles. And I like to use color, and I am loving that there is more and more color coming in to interior design. And I think there is a real movement, not away from those beautiful, neutral, earthy toned homes, but I think there is a trend in seeing more of those things like the eucalyptus greens and the terracotta oranges, and even, the people that will watch The Block can see those color references coming through in things like The Block as well. But color really excites me. And so color drenching is my one really big trend that I hope I see more of.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I think that it was a really interesting chat. And for those of you who are interested in tiny living, wanting to renovate a tiny home of your own, make sure to check out Samantha's page. Like I said, I'll add all the details in the show notes below. Okay, so I'm going to let you go because I'm going to go onto Marketplace now and go and look for myself a tiny house to renovate. I mean, I've always wanted to do a renovation of a tiny house. We've been talking about it for a long time and it's definitely inspired me. I don't know if I'm ready to pack up and make it a lifestyle, but absolutely a short-term holiday style lifestyle for us. I think it'd be loads of fun.
And that's the other thing. You don't have to do this full time.
Yeah.
If you want it just to be occasionally on the weekends, or, you have friends or a family member that has a property where you could park the tiny home on and, you go there for just a little retreat. This doesn't have to be a permanent lifestyle choice the way we have made it. You can certainly do this on the same scale, but just not do it full time.
No, I love that. And you have 100% inspired me. I'm literally going to be talking to my husband this evening about our summer holidays going forward. So thank you everyone for tuning in to the Dream Home Renovation. So we were talking with Samantha from Curious Carter today. And like I said, all her details will be in the show notes. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, make sure to subscribe and share far and wide. And I look forward to seeing you in the next show. By all means, if you have any topics or requests, go over to social media and hit me up at Reno Way of Life, and I'd love to hear from you. Other than that, happy renovating.